Hey there, everyone. My name is Alberto Rodriguez, and I work for the State Bar of Arizona. And today we are having our second edition of Arizona Attorneys Respond. Today we have invited attorney John Halk from McQueen and Gottlieb here in town. And he's a real estate attorney who's going to answer all the questions that you have submitted via Facebook or email regarding your questions on the landlord-tenant laws currently with the COVID-19 pandemic that's going on. So there's been a few announcements by the governor. He's issued executive orders, and it's causing a little bit of confusion. So we're hoping that today's segment, our Q&A session with John, will help clarify some of your questions. So John, thank you for being here today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Alberto. I'm really excited to do this with you.
Awesome, awesome. This is a big value to our members of the public. Legal help can be expensive, and then just randomly calling you think might be able to help you isn't always the most effective way to get legal help. So we're hoping that the public sees a lot of value in what we're offering today. So let's go ahead and get started. Real quick, John, can you give me an update or help the public understand Governor Ducey's executive order means when he talked about eviction extensions?
Yeah, absolutely. So on March 24th, Governor Ducey signed an executive order. It's Executive Order 2020-14. It's called the Postponement of Eviction Action. Basically what this is it's an executive order that is postponing the enforcement of any eviction action that's brought by a landlord against any tenants if they meet one of 5 different categories. So the executive order lays those out, and the 5 different categories are either you personally being diagnosed with COVID-19, if someone in your home or someone that you're residing with has been diagnosed with COVID-19, if you have any health conditions, if you have any health conditions that make you more at risk to contract that, that's going to be another exception. And then also if you have suffered any substantial loss of income as a result of this coronavirus, then that's going to be another exception for you to be applying under this executive order.
Awesome. Awesome. So just to clarify, I know that some of the confusion was the executive order. The governor said, you know, we don't have to pay our rent. And that's not the basically, if you're, you know, you have a day rent. If you can't make the rent, it's only stopping the eviction. It's not stopping any fees or your actual rent from accumulating, correct?
Absolutely, yeah. This is not rent forgiveness. This is not writing off any rents. The name of the order itself explains it. The name of the order itself is Postponement of Eviction Actions. So the landlord is still going to have every right to file an eviction lawsuit. The landlord will even have the right to get an eviction judgment. The only thing that it's postponing is the landlord's enforcement of that judgment. So if you've had one entered against you, the order is good for 120 days from the time that it was signed. So that's going to be effective all the way until July 24th. So that's important to note. The other thing that's important to note is that qualifying under one of those 5 categories it is good, but in order for it to actually take effect, you're going to need written documentation, and you need to provide that written documentation in a written notice to your landlord. So if you've had if you're diagnosed with COVID-19, you're going to need those medical bills or doctor's note. If you've lost your job, you're going to need those pay stubs or those unemployment requests, but something documented to provide to the landlord to show that you qualify.
Gotcha. So remember, folks, that it's really important to understand that your rent is not being delayed, or the due date for your rent is not being delayed, and you're not going to stop receiving any type of fees if that's what your landlord does. It's only delaying the eviction process, so they can actually evict you. You might get a letter that says you're on your way to eviction, but under the order, they can't kick you. Thank you for that. I know, again, folks had a lot of questions regarding the executive order and what the landlord is saying, or what other people are saying, because we always tend to turn to our friends to kind of try to understand laws, right? Or these exceptions or these temporary fixes.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, John, we'll go ahead and dive into the first question. There are a few questions that might overlap. I don't think so. But for those at home, you have every opportunity to kind of skip this Q&A session with John himself if the question's not pertinent to you. advance questions. So the first question is, my family is on time with our rent, but our landlord is trying to evict us because we violated the lease terms for health and safety for being sick with coronavirus. Is there anything that we...
Absolutely. So if you've been affected, number one, you're going to qualify under this executive order. If you've been diagnosed with COVID-19, provide that notice to your landlord. That alone is going to stop the eviction. More to the direct points with violating health and safety. It's true that landlords have an obligation to maintain a fit and habitable premises, and they also have a duty to maintain the health and safety inside a rental unit. If you've been diagnosed with COVID-19, that's specifically included in the order that that's not a basis to evict someone. So if you have diagnosed or been diagnosed with it and the landlord says you have to be removed, that's not the case. It's explicitly in the executive order.
Excellent, excellent. So they don't have to get out just because they've been diagnosed.
Absolutely not.
Although the landlord probably thinks that they're doing a service for the other renters, but under the executive order, get out.
Absolutely.
The next question is, I signed forms for my lease, gave them to the property manager. Before COVID-19, everything was fine to renew, but now the property manager says that they have to talk to corporate to get a decision because I work in an emergency, and it could possibly affect other residents. So that's personnel in the...
Yeah, personnel in the medical field and anyone else who's an essential service. First, thanks to that person who is in the hospital and working in the medical field. You guys are the real heroes. I have family that's working in the medical field in hospitals around the country. So we all appreciate what you guys are doing to help everyone. Yeah. So to address your question, just working in an emergency room or working in an essential service, that's definitely not a basis to end a lease term. If you have, in the question, they were saying that they already have the lease term coming up and they're trying to renew it. A landlord is within his rights to terminate a lease at the end. They're not obligated to continue it. If they said their explicit reason was because you worked in an ER, that wouldn't be a valid reason. I would encourage that person to speak with an attorney, but it's a little bit fact specific. But to the question, no, working in the medical field is not a basis to evict someone, nor should it be.
Gotcha. Yeah, it definitely shouldn't. I mean, it's interpretation, and that's what we're here doing, is clarifying that.
Absolutely.
So I signed prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, and some of these sound a little similar, but then they kind of specify. I'm supposed to be moving into an apartment in April, but got laid off from my job. I contacted the apartment owner, but they're unwilling to cancel or postpone the lease. What are my rights with the current climate of the coronavirus pandemic?
Great. So for this question, if you have already entered into a lease agreement, a lease is essentially a contract. So by you signing the contract, you're contractually obligating yourself to pay rents, and the landlord's contractually obligating themselves to provide you with a place to live. A lot of things have changed. So if you've had a change in your income and you got laid off from your job, again, I point you to the executive order. You're going to qualify under that reduction of income, and you're going to be able to postpone any eviction actions that do happen. That's going to serve you as a bigger benefit. I would encourage you to contact the management company and the landlord, because if you do move into a rental unit and you're unable to pay, it's going to be a poor business decision for the landlord and management company, because once you move in, if you're not able to pay, they in turn won't be able to evict you until July 24th. So that's going to be about 4 months worth of rents that they're going to lose out on, versus if they just allow you to terminate the lease now, it's in their interest just to get someone else in there. So I would point them to that executive order, notify them of your rights under the executive order, and see if you can work something out with the management company to get out of that lease agreement.
Great, great. Speaking of documentation and the executive order, this next question says, I provided forms and documentation to my landlord, but they say that the documentation isn't enough. Can the landlord decide they don't accept the documents that I provide? I'm afraid they'll just change the locks and kick me out.
Okay. Well, the first part, they're not going to change the locks and kick you out. Definitely can't do that. Even with everything going on, landlords and management companies still have to file the eviction process. So if you're not paying or there's any issue with the lease, they still have to go through the formal litigation proceedings, filing a complaint with the court, getting a judgment, and going through those avenues. So they're not going to come in the middle of the night and change the locks. They shouldn't. If they do, call an attorney. Number two, regarding the sufficiency of the documents themselves, if you're providing documents and they're supporting your claim, to that person's specific question, I'd have to know what documents were provided. But if you have been diagnosed with COVID-19, provide those medical documents. If you lost your job, provide those pay stubs, provide those unemployment requests. Whatever your documents are supporting your qualifications under the executive order, as long as they are sufficient, then they should definitely qualify. If it's in good faith, I'm not sure why a landlord wouldn't accept it. But if they're not, I would encourage those people to contact an attorney to express their rights under the executive order.
Gotcha. Great. Next question. So this is interesting because it's talking about social distancing, which everybody is kind of confused about as well. But this one says, landlord said they couldn't perform repairs on our unit, social distancing. We can't use the kitchen sink and we can't use the dishwasher. Is there anything that we can do?
Certainly. Social distancing is great. Definitely something we encourage. It really seems to be making a difference right now. But to the extent that a landlord is using it as an excuse not to perform repairs in the unit, there could be some credence to it. In this specific example, it's not going to qualify. If you have a plumbing issue, plumbers are deemed an essential service. So if you have a plumbing issue, an electrical issue, there's a number of things besides just the medical community and pharmacies and other things that are going to be labeled essential services. So if you have a plumbing issue, your sink's not working, definitely contact your landlord, notify them that the plumber is an essential service, and they should definitely be following up to make those repairs in your unit.
Gotcha. And I can see where the landlord, again, in this case, is trying to protect the renter and trying to go in, or themselves in not going to the unit, but there are ways that you can get around that. And again, being an essential service, I mean, it's pretty funky to have a drain that's stopped up, right? So I think that the recommendation, John, is that call your landlord up and tell them that you are good with the social distancing, but you need that sink fixed. Next question. My landlord just gave us 2 months notice to move by text message or via text message. Can my landlord do that during this time of a public health emergency?
Okay, so answer there is maybe. It's going to depend on whether the landlord is trying to break the lease early or if the lease is just ending on its own terms in 2 months. If you have a lease that's set to expire later this year and the landlord is sending you a text message saying, hey, I want to end the lease agreements, no. Like we talked about, having a lease is a contractual obligation. And as long as you're paying the rents and meeting all your obligations under the rental agreements, they're not going to be able to evict you sooner or terminate the lease any sooner than what's specified. If the lease itself is set to expire in 2 months, then yes, it's within the landlord's right to terminate that lease. They don't need to give you a reason. They can just end the lease if that's when the lease term ends.
Gotcha. So it just depends on the intention of the text, whether it's like, hey, you have 2 months because you're up in 2 months, or you have 2 months and we just need you out. So it's the intention of the text.
Yeah, and if it's 2 months, that's probably just a heads up. I'm sure there's going to be a formal writing to come sooner if that's their intent.
Right. All righty. An interesting question as well. So if amenities are included in our rent, but they shut down every single one of them, for example, the pool, business center, the exercise room, etc., should we still be charged for this? So it's included, but at a fee of $50 that's included on their monthly statement.
Probably not. So if you are paying rent and on top of paying rent, you're also paying a fee for amenities, then if the landlord is not allowing you to use those amenities but still charging you a fee, in my mind, that's breach of contract. You're paying the rent to stay there, and if there's a separate fee to utilize all the different amenities, that would be something separate. It would depend on what the contract says in the actual lease agreements. If there were a provision that said something to the effect of the landlord having the ability to close amenities for health and safety reasons, something like that, I think it's unlikely that's in there, but depending on the lease itself, it's possible, but most likely no. If you can't use the amenities, you shouldn't be charged for not having access to it.
Okay. So just look at your contract. If they did include that provision that, if we have to shut it down because the government says it, then that's where you have to look. Perfect. Next question. I've tried working with my landlord on our rent payment since I lost my job in March, but they're not really working with me. Will an eviction on my record make it harder for me to rent in another apartment in the future even though we're dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic?
Yeah, short answer on that is yes, unfortunately. If you have a prior eviction on your history, that is something that's going to show up on most background checks and credit checks. A lot of management companies and landlords do require those. So to the extent that you have a foreclosure or an eviction, then that's definitely something that could make it more difficult in the future. What I would say is that if you lost your job, again, that's going to be something that qualifies under the executive order. There's some government stimulus programs going on. There's some renter assistance programs. If any of those can help you make the rent in the meantime, that can help you avoid an eviction. Worst case scenario, if an eviction judgment is entered against you, at some point in the future, if you have the funds to pay it, you can go and make a request for what's called a satisfaction of judgment. And basically what that's saying is that while a judgment was entered against you, you subsequently satisfied it, and that's going to look a lot better on a credit report or credit history in the future when you make applications for a rental place.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's it's tough right now, but the services, that all moves forward. That's just kind of how business works. Next question: if I get a summons from the court for an eviction, do I have to go to a court even though there's a stay-at-home order?
Yes, always follow the court order. If you have an order from a court to appear or to submit something, always listen to what the court says. If you have a specific condition, if you have been diagnosed with COVID, if you have a personal circumstance that's preventing you from going, call the court, speak with the clerk, have them relay that information to the judge. Most of these hearings are being conducted telephonically right now, in part of the social distancing and keeping everyone separate, kind of like this video conference. We have our own social distancing going on, but definitely get in contact with the court and at least notify them what your conditions are and let them know you received the notice.
Actually, as a side note to that question, we at the State Bar just received an administrative order from the courts talking about the way the courts would operate during this time. So they just issued that today. So if you do have a summons, make sure that you're visiting the court, that specific court, to make sure that they're even open. But like John, they might have alternative telephonic hearings. So make sure that you visit the court that you are being summoned to. Next question is, my spouse is sick from the coronavirus and the property manager told other residents in our building and the complex, told them that we were under quarantine and that they should watch out. Are they allowed to tell people that my husband is sick?
Another good question. Lots of good ones here. So this one's going to be a little bit more fact specific. I can see a little bit on both sides here. If you're a management company and you have someone who has been diagnosed with COVID, sending out just general notice saying someone in the community has been diagnosed, practice social distancing. If you feel sick or have flu-like symptoms, contact your doctor. It should be fine. If you have something that's a little bit more individualized, if you say, Bob in unit 100 has coronavirus, stay away from him, he's bad, he's sick, something like that. It's a little bit more personal, and that's kind of what it sounds like is in this case. There may be some potential claims that you have here. There might be an invasion of privacy if you're directly discussing someone. I would need a little bit more facts on the circumstances, how the information was disseminated, how everyone heard about it, and some of those. But if you feel like there's a claim, I would encourage that person to speak with an attorney.
Absolutely. Next question. The lease ended at one place and I signed a new lease at another, but I just tested positive for COVID-19. Do I have to move right now?
You don't have to move right now. If you just tested positive for COVID-19, then if you'll qualify under that first prong of the governor's executive order. So you can provide documentation that you've been or that you've contracted COVID-19, and then you're going to be able to stay in that rental unit at least until July 24th. But make sure you have written documentation, provide written notice to your landlord, and make sure that they have all that information. And
real quick, as a side note from somebody that, that obviously is not an attorney, if the lease was up and the landlord had somebody waiting for that lease, they can still pay that executive order.
So yeah, if the lease is coming to an end, I would definitely encourage that person to move if they can, because if you are holding over, if the lease was set to end on April 1st and you have COVID-19 and the landlord's provided you with the proper notices, they've given you everything to make that you're supposed to leave on April 1st, you would still be bound to it. If you have to, it's possible that the landlord could file an eviction action against you. that's I would encourage you to have a conversation with them, because if you're actually sick and you have all these issues going on, I don't think it's really in anyone's best interest to move forward with an eviction or anything. But I would encourage them to talk with the landlord.
Gotcha. I just, I wanted to clarify that because, if they go back and say, hey, you know what, they said I don't have to move, but there's steps they have to take.
Yes.
Absolutely. And one of the first demographics that were affected by COVID-19 were students, right? Because a lot of the universities began to shut down, or a lot of other business and organizations. So this one's specific to that demo, and it says, my roommate and I lease an apartment off campus. Since classes are online, back home with their family. We're both on the lease, but she's gone now and I'm getting evicted. What do I do? I don't have anywhere else to go.
Tough question. So this one, when you entered into the lease agreements, again, it's contracts. Both of you guys are obligated to make those rent payments. If your roommate has left as a result of this COVID pandemic going on, I believe that you would still qualify under the executive order. Under the loss of income, there's sort of a catch-all provision that just says any other pertinent circumstances. So if you're involved with lease agreements or rent agreements, and the person who you were living with left because of school issues and moving home and anything like that, in my mind, that qualifies. Have some documentation, have a letter from the roommate talking about what happened, why they had to move, submit that in writing to your landlord, and I believe that would still qualify. So that would at least give you at least until July to figure out some new living accommodations, and hopefully that can help you on the next steps.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. We have two more questions. One is from a renter, and then one is actually from the business side of things. So let's finish up with the rental. Somebody says that they're up on April 30th, and their property manager just that 30-day notice because they want to sell the home. However, their family's in quarantine and they don't think it's the best time to move. What can they do?
Certainly understand the concern there. With stay-at-home orders and everything else going on, definitely best to stay at home. However, if you do have a lease term that's up on April 30th, I would strongly encourage those people to make other living arrangements. The landlord does have the right to terminate the lease and have new renters in to sell the home, whatever the landlord chooses to do. So definitely encourage you to do that. I would also encourage them to speak with the landlord or the management company. If you want to have a conversation about doing a month-to-month plan, maybe for an extra month or two. If you offer to pay additional rents, sometimes those can work. But if push comes to shove, if the landlord just says, they want it to terminate on April 30th, that would be something enforceable. And the alternative would be filing an eviction judgment. And I think that would be the lesser of the two choices.
Right. So they can, potentially say, hey, we're struggling right now. Give us a chance to do this month to month until, we're free and clear to move about, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And then again, just going to the business side of things, there's a lot of small businesses that have rent as well, right? They're leasing space throughout town. It might be a restaurant who had to consolidate services. It might be a barber shop who had to close, right? Mm-hmm. So these rent do. So it says, what about business tenants and office spaces? I have a landlord saying that they will wait for rent money only if we apply for an SBA loan. So that's like a caveat from that specific landlord. What are your thoughts on
that? So I would definitely encourage any small businesses to apply for SBA loans. There's a large amount of federal funding that just got approved for SBAs and small businesses. As it relates to other landlord-tenant issues in the governor's executive order, unfortunately, commercial leases and business operations are not included in the executive order. So to the extent that you have an inability to pay rents or anything else on a business or commercial lease, that's going to be business as usual. Rents due on the terms of your contract, all the provisions are going to remain, and there's not going to be any additional protections aside from what's already in Arizona law. Again, reach out to those SBA loan companies. There's a lot of private funding and grants that are also helping small businesses, and try and exhaust all of those resources to the best of your ability. Gotcha.
So again, just to clarify, for you small business owners that are out there, it's business as usual. You have to pay your rent. But as John mentioned, the Small Business Administration does have loans that they are giving. So if you want to learn more about that, you can go to sba.gov to see if you qualify. You can actually apply in a pretty easy application process to do that. But yeah, John, that's the end of the actual questions that we got from the public. Is there anything else that you want to add to the Q&A session?
Yeah, absolutely. Just a couple other general tips. This is kind of more geared towards landlord-tenant issues. So along the lines of helping landlords and also just general homeowners. If you have a mortgage and it's federally financed, if it's gone through Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae, all these federal entities are suspending any foreclosure proceedings, and they're making a lot of efforts to try and help people who can't make payments right now. So not only the federal side, but a lot of private companies who are offering mortgages. We're also having deferments, they're having forbearance, they're having things that can help you just kind of push payments off until things get settled with everything going on right now. So if you're a homeowner or if you're a landlord, definitely contact your mortgage company if you're having issues. If you're a homeowner, they have another program. It's called Save Our Home AZ, and it's a program through the Arizona Housing Department. They help a lot of people who are trying to avoid foreclosure and having issues with paying for their home. Not only that, there's a couple other issues. If you're a renter and you had some issues like we talked about today, the Arizona Housing Department just approved a $5 million grants. They're helping a lot of people who are trying to make ends meet with their rents. So if you're having any of these issues with COVID, with loss of your job, just generally being affected by this whole pandemic that's really affecting everyone in the world, honestly. But there's a little bit that we're doing here in Arizona to help with some of those. So go to housing.az.gov. And there's an application under the eviction protection or eviction prevention tab. So definitely look at that. Last, utilities. If you have utilities with SRP, APS, Tucson Electric, there's a number of other utility companies that the state of Arizona is in discussions with. They've all made agreements to keep utilities on. So electric, water, any of those. If you're having issues with paying for any of them, definitely contact your utility company. They have a lot of programs to help keep the lights on and keep the water flowing in the meantime.
Awesome stuff, man. I know we focused on landlord-tenant issues, and I'm sure that there's a few folks here that are experiencing, hard times with paying their mortgage. So that's definitely great resources that you provided. And I knew I could count on you, man. For those who are watching, John, a past volunteer for other events, and he's just so knowledgeable. That's why we invited him to come back and participate in this Arizona Attorneys Respond. So again, John, I just want to thank you for joining us today, and I want to thank your firm for letting us borrow you for 20 minutes and getting the public informed. So thank you for that. Real quick, I also want to thank the Arizona Foundation for Legal Services, Legal Education and Services, because they also helped us get questions from the public. So with their help, with social media, our new program here is really providing some solid feedback for the public. So I want to thank them as well. So that's the Foundation for Legal Services and Education. And then I want to thank the viewers, the public, who are submitting their questions. We know times are tough. We know that legal help is expensive, and we are here to help you all. So as John mentioned earlier, we're doing this question and answer session virtually because of social distancing, but we want to continue to do that. So stay tuned for the next topic, and that is going to be on wills and trusts, because unfortunately, this virus has resulted in untimely death, and while it's not the easiest subject to talk about, it's an important one. So I want you guys to stay tuned and ask your questions about that as well. So John, thank you again for participating, for helping so many people. You're truly an asset to the community here in Arizona.
Thank you very much, Alberto. I was happy to help and do what we can to help everyone out in this time of need.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, and we'll see you guys next time.